Have you ever built something with your own hands, watched it grow, nurtured it for decades, only to be told one day that a machine could do it better? That's how my story begins, not with failure or laziness or incompetence, but with an algorithm, a silent, glowing promise of efficiency and optimization that erased 30 years of loyalty with the click of a button. My name is Daniel Reyes. I was the lead systems architect at Orion Freight Systems for over 3 decades. I designed the backbone of their logistics platform before artificial intelligence was even a buzzword, before consultants with sleek suits and bright slides began whispering about automation and generational change. And just like that, I was gone, replaced, phased out not by performance, but by prediction models and cost curves. At first, I walked away quietly. But when the system I'd built began to unravel, when the shipments stopped, the clients panicked, and the boardroom turned cold, they remembered the man they called obsolete. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about dignity, about how things fall apart when we forget where true value lies. If this story speaks to you, like, comment, or subscribe, because some things no algorithm can replace. I started at Orion Freight Systems in 1993 when their entire operation ran on spreadsheets, paper ledgers, and fax machines. Back then, they had 18 trucks, 3 dispatchers, and a warehouse that flooded every spring. I was 29, recently laid off from a mid-sized manufacturing firm that had outsourced its IT overseas. My resume didn't sparkle, but I knew how to build things quietly, methodically, with an eye for what could go wrong. The founder, Ernesto Vega, was old school. He didn't trust computers, but he trusted his accountant, who told him they were bleeding money due to lost orders and mismatched invoices. So Ernesto brought me on, gave me a desk in the corner of the warehouse, and a used desktop that took 5 minutes to boot up. "If you can make this place run smoother, the job's yours, as long as you want it," he told me. And I did. Over time, I replaced paper with databases, built the first internal tracking system from scratch using a combination of Access Excel macros and sheer willpower. Then I migrated it to SQL, integrated it with partner APIs, developed a predictive dispatching algorithm long before machine learning became fashionable. When competitors were still faxing confirmations, Orion clients were tracking packages in real time through a secure web portal I designed myself over Christmas break. I wasn't flashy. I didn't go to conferences or write white papers. But every time the company grew, when it expanded from 1 state to 5, then 10, I was there. Rewriting the back end, optimizing the data layers, documenting enough to keep things moving, but not enough to make myself irrelevant. It wasn't about job security. It was about pride. I knew that if I didn't build it right, no one else would. Ernesto treated me like a partner. He'd drop by my office with coffee, ask about system loads, and joke that if the servers ever went down, we'd all be out of business in 20 minutes. He wasn't wrong. What I built wasn't just a system. It was the pulse of the entire operation, from driver schedules to cross-dock optimization, from fuel efficiency metrics to compliance logs. When Ernesto retired in 2016 and sold Orion to a tech-focused logistics conglomerate, I stayed, out of loyalty, out of habit, maybe even out of fear. The new CEO, a polished executive named Rena Caldwell, came in talking about digital transformation and next-gen efficiency. I nodded through her slide decks and continued doing what I always did, keeping the company running. I didn't argue when they started bringing in outside consultants. I didn't flinch when I was left off strategy meetings. I thought foolishly that the work spoke for itself. It didn't, because in the new world they were building, knowledge wasn't power anymore. Optics were, buzzwords were, artificial intelligence was. And the quiet man in the server room who knew where every connection lived, he had become invisible. But I wasn't done. Not yet. It started with coffee carts and jargon. Rena Caldwell brought in a consulting firm called Nova Mind Solutions, young, energetic, and in their words, specialized in AI-driven logistics optimization. They arrived in sleek clothes with polished smiles, wheeling tablets around like stethoscopes. For 2 weeks, they wandered the halls of Orion holding listening sessions with staff conducting workflow immersion workshops and sketching mind maps on whiteboards covered in arrows and hashtags. They never once stepped into the server room. I watched from my office, the same corner room I'd had for over 20 years, as these consultants interviewed junior staff about bottlenecks and experience gaps. They asked drivers about mobile UX pain points. They shadowed dispatchers for hours, but never once asked how the routing engine worked, never traced where the back-end logic came from, or who maintained it when things broke. One afternoon, out of curiosity, I invited one of their lead analysts to my office. A sharp kid named Jordan, polite, enthusiastic, and utterly unaware. I asked him, "Do you have access to the system architecture maps?" He blinked. We were told everything was in the cloud already. That sentence hung in the air like a warning flare. It wasn't. Much of Orion's infrastructure still ran on a hybrid system I'd built part legacy, part cloud. Not because we were behind, but because that architecture allowed for real-time route optimization that adapted to traffic weather and load constraints. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't plug and play. But it worked. Seamlessly. Jordan nodded vaguely and changed the subject. Later that week, I received a company-wide memo. NovaMind had completed their digital readiness audit and presented their findings to the executive board. Among the recommendations, migrate all operations to an AI-powered logistics platform called SynapseX, a predictive engine that promised to streamline dispatching, reduce operational cost by 18%, and eliminate reliance on legacy systems. No one asked me to review the integration plan. No one even asked me if SynapseX could actually interface with the systems I'd built. Instead, they sent me a generic invite to a legacy system transition offboarding workshop. That was the moment I knew. They weren't just planning to upgrade the system, they were planning to erase me. A few days later, a junior developer, a good kid named Leo, who had worked under me for 5 years, stopped by my office with wide eyes and an awkward tone. "Dan," he said, "they're listing you as retiring in the new org chart." I hadn't submitted a resignation. I hadn't even been formally told I was being let go. They were simply going to phase me out. Quietly, politely, like a file being deleted, with no confirmation prompt. But what they didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the architecture I built had shadows. Not everything was visible on a dashboard. Not every module was documented in the cloud. Some pieces of the system only existed in my head, or in scripts buried deep in protected folders. And those pieces were more important than they could ever imagine. They didn't fire me in a meeting. There was no handshake, no exit interview, no gold watch for 3 decades of service. Instead, I received a calendar invite titled Strategic Realignment Discussion, scheduled for 9:00 a.m. on a Thursday. I knew exactly what it was. When I walked into the conference room, Rena Caldwell was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by 2 NovaMind consultants and a man I didn't recognize, tall, sharp suit, expressionless face. I would later learn he was a representative from SynapseX. Daniel Rena said with a smile so tight it could have been stapled on. "Thanks for making time. This won't take long." Of course it wouldn't. They began with a pitch, not to me, to themselves, really. A pre-rehearsed justification. As we embrace a future-forward approach, Rena read from a branded folder Orion is committing to a fully AI-driven operational backbone. Then came the killer line. The new system eliminates the need for manual architecture maintenance and legacy oversight. Manual oversight. That was me. She went on describing how SynapseX used generative AI and predictive optimization models to reroute freight more efficiently, how it used real-time data to adjust schedules, even predicted equipment failure before it happened. It's adaptive scalable, she said, and doesn't require individual system owners. I let that last part settle. They didn't just want to fire me, they wanted to pretend I never existed. My systems, my decisions, my sleepless nights fixing emergency crashes at 2 a.m. All of it was being overwritten by a cold, polished interface. They even showed me a slide that called the transition phase Zero Removing Human Bottlenecks. Human bottlenecks. I looked at Rena and said, "You mean people?" She gave me the kind of look executives give when they know they've already won. "We appreciate everything you've contributed, Daniel, but as of next Friday, we'll be sunsetting your position." Sunsetting, she said, as if my role were a broken feature in an outdated app. The Synapse X rep spoke next, handing me a folder I didn't open. "If you could prepare a handover packet, we'd appreciate guidance on any non-standard interfaces." I almost laughed. There were hundreds of non-standard interfaces, custom-built connectors, scripts I'd written in response to partner-specific requirements, emergency workarounds no AI platform could anticipate, and many of them weren't documented in any central repository, not because I was hiding them, but because they weren't supposed to be permanent. Until they were. Instead of arguing, I nodded. "I'll prepare something," I said calmly. Rena smiled relieved. "We appreciate your professionalism." I stood, thanked them for their time, and walked out of the conference room without another word. But inside, something had shifted. I had spent 30 years making sure this company worked not just on paper, not just in presentations, but in reality. And now they were betting that a faceless algorithm could replace that kind of care. They were wrong. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was patient. And I knew exactly where the cracks would form. The day I left Orion, no one clapped. There was no farewell lunch, no framed certificate, no forced smiles around a sheet cake in the break room. Just a cardboard box, a deactivated key card, and a message from HR that read, "Thank you for your years of service." I didn't need the applause, but the silence was deafening. I spent my last 4 days documenting what they asked for, but only what they asked for. The official systems, the visible layers, database schemas, user credentials, general backup procedures. I typed it all into a 52-page handover document, signed it, and sent it to the project lead with a brief note. "Please confirm receipt." What I didn't include were the heartbeat scripts, the ones that kept load balancers from misfiring when an API call returned an unexpected code. I didn't mention the real-time override switches hidden in a subroutine I'd named after my wife's birthday, the only failsafe that could stop a cascading server loop during a partner system crash. I didn't describe the custom-built authentication bridges that let us interface with legacy partners still using proprietary protocols from the early 2000s. Those scripts weren't part of the official codebase. They weren't visible in SynapseX's architecture audit, and they weren't listed anywhere in the company's documentation directory because they weren't official. They were necessary. When I first built them, I'd planned to clean them up and formally integrate them later. But then more emergencies came. More quick fixes, more weekends. Over time, those temporary patches became the foundation of real operations. And because they worked seamlessly, invisibly, no one questioned them. No one knew they were even there. No one except me. On my final day, I left my badge on the reception desk, turned once to look at the server room, dark humming faithful, and stepped outside into the cold. The air felt strange, like standing at the edge of something I hadn't named yet. I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Then I logged into an encrypted backup I'd kept for years, a personal archive of notes, diagrams, scripts, not company property, but my own reflections, my own thoughts, my own code. I didn't look at them with bitterness. I looked at them like a surgeon studies his old notebooks with familiarity, with purpose, and with the kind of understanding no AI system could ever replicate. That evening, I received an email from a former client, a large automotive partner I had helped onboard 8 years earlier. "Heard you're leaving Orion," it read. "If you're ever open to consulting, we'd love to talk." I didn't reply. Not yet, because I had a feeling they weren't done with me. Not by a long shot. And when they came calling, not if, when I'd be ready. Not out of spite. Not even for revenge. But because some lessons have to be learned the hard way. It didn't take long. The first cracks appeared less than 72 hours after SynapseX went live. At first, they were brushed off as normal integration hiccups, a missed shipment here, a delayed route there. But I knew better. I'd seen these exact symptoms before, back when I was still writing custom patches to keep things from falling apart in the early days. Only this time, no one was watching the vitals. By the end of the first week, Orion's eastbound freight routes were in disarray. Drivers were calling dispatch asking why their drop-off addresses didn't match their delivery manifests. One major grocery partner reported receiving frozen goods at room temperature because the AI's new algorithm had rerouted a refrigerated truck through a 14-hour detour to optimize for fuel efficiency. But it wasn't just mistakes, it was misunderstanding. SynapseX didn't know that one of our major clients in Denver required a special digital handshake to accept incoming tracking data. The AI had simply assumed all partners followed the same API standard, so when SynapseX pinged the endpoint using a modern protocol, it failed silently. That triggered a chain reaction, failed acknowledgement, missed confirmation, auto-canceled orders. By Monday morning, that client had suspended their contract. Internally, chaos reigned. Leo, the junior dev who used to work under me, called me from his car during his lunch break. "Dan, it's bad," he said. "We're getting dozens of error logs from partners, and SynapseX's support team keeps saying it's a configuration issue. But they don't know how any of this was wired together." I stayed quiet. "They're trying to reverse engineer everything," he continued. "But none of the integrations are documented. They didn't even know about the legacy cron jobs that handle load syncing overnight." Of course they didn't. SynapseX had assumed it was being plugged into a clean, flat environment. But Orion's system wasn't flat. It was layered, organic, full of small but essential quirks built up over 3 decades of adapting to real-world needs, things no machine could intuit on first contact. Then came the real blow. Friday afternoon, 4:17 p.m., the main routing database collapsed, not crash collapsed. A misfired optimization command tried to overwrite a lookup table that had been protected by one of my hidden scripts, the one that had quietly stopped similar operations hundreds of times in the past. Without that script, the system ate itself. Routes vanished. Dispatch schedules desynced. Drivers were left without instructions. By 5 p.m., nearly 300 shipments were stalled across 6 states. That same night, Orion's largest retail partner, a national electronics chain, pulled the plug. Citing unrecoverable delivery inconsistencies and critical data integrity concerns, they terminated their contract, effective immediately. The fallout spread fast. I didn't hear any of this from Orion officially. They weren't reaching out, not yet, but I heard it from people who used to be mine. Quiet voices in panicked messages, midnight texts, emails that began with, "I know you're probably busy, but..." They were unraveling. Rena Caldwell issued a public statement calling the issues temporary technical challenges. But internally, the panic was growing. IT teams were working 20-hour shifts. Partners were threatening legal action. Finance was calculating losses in the millions. And I was sipping coffee at home, calmly watching the same morning news feeds that used to mention Orion's growth. Only now they were covering something else. Regional freight leader faces major AI meltdown. That headline made me pause, because the real damage hadn't even started yet. They thought replacing a man with a machine would make them future-proof. But they forgot machines don't remember how things really work. People do. The first call came Monday morning at 7:12 a.m. I was on my porch mug in hand, watching a slow sunrise bleed through the trees. The caller ID flashed Orion Freight HQ. I let it ring. Then I silenced it. A minute later, another call, this time from a number I recognized: Leo. Then HR. Then someone from the SynapseX transition team. Back-to-back like clockwork. I didn't answer. By 9:00 a.m., my inbox was flooding. Urgent legacy integration questions. Critical. Routing failure logs. Immediate assistance requested. Every subject line screamed panic disguised in corporate politeness. One email even had the subject, "Daniel, please, just a few minutes of your time." It was tempting. Not out of guilt, I owed them nothing but out of habit. For 30 years, when the system blinked red, I responded. I was the man who fixed things, the guy who showed up when no one else knew what to do. But this time I sipped my coffee, leaned back, and watched the steam rise. By noon, Rena finally called me herself. "Daniel?" She began, her voice thinner than I remembered. "We're experiencing unforeseen issues with the implementation. We believe some of the legacy systems had undocumented dependencies." Undocumented dependencies. That was a tidy way to describe the custom infrastructure I'd spent nights and weekends patching together so her clients could get next-day delivery. "What do you need?" I asked flatly. She hesitated. "We'd like your assistance walking the Synapse X team through some of the older modules. Just short-term, just until things stabilize." I waited, let the silence stretch, then replied, "I'm available as a consultant. My rate is $200 an hour, 40-hour minimum engagement, payable in advance." Rena paused. "That's Daniel. This is not the time to negotiate. We're in the middle of a crisis, and I'm offering a solution," she scoffed. "You're holding us hostage." "No," I said. "I'm offering you a lifeboat. Whether or not you step in is your decision." She hung up. An hour later, Leo texted me. "It's getting worse. Cloud backups failed. Dispatch logs are gone. Synapse X can't even connect to the backup servers because they're encrypted. No one knows how to access the override protocols." Rena just called an emergency board meeting. By evening, they were calling every 5 minutes. Different voices, different strategies. One guy offered me a contractor pass and an Uber to HQ. Another tried the guilt route. "Daniel, this isn't about money. Drivers are stranded. People are losing hours." And it was true. The people I used to work with, the ones on the floor, the dispatchers, the late-night techs, they were paying for Rena's mistake. They didn't make the decision to replace me. But they were bleeding for it. That's what made it hard. But I'd made my decision. The next day, I received a formal email from Orion's legal department, a request for immediate consulting services acknowledging system failure, authorizing my rate. Attached was a letter signed by Rena herself. No buzzwords this time. Just one sentence in bold: "We need your help." I replied 2 hours later. "Availability, next Monday. Terms 80 hours minimum. No remote walkthroughs, full server access required. Advance payment expected." 3 minutes after sending it, my phone rang again. I didn't answer. Not yet. By Thursday, the story had spilled beyond the walls of Orion. What started as an internal technical issue was now a headline on every logistics blog and regional news site: "Freight giant faces AI catastrophe, human oversight." Missing. I didn't need insider updates anymore. I heard the consequences from former partners, industry peers, and even casual acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. One call stood out: Tom Ashford, a former client liaison who now worked for one of Orion's competitors. "Dan," he said, "we just got a call from Polaris Auto Parts. They're asking if we can take over their shipments." Said Orion lost track of an entire week's inventory. That's over 100,000 units. That wasn't a hiccup. That was a hemorrhage. Word spread fast in this industry. Clients who had once praised Orion for reliability were now panicking. Distribution centers were idle. Retailers were rescheduling launches, and drivers, hundreds of them, were sitting in parking lots waiting for dispatch instructions that never came. The same people I used to wave to in the break room were now watching their hours disappear and their paychecks shrink because someone had trusted a machine to make human decisions. But the real shift came Friday afternoon when I got a call from Nadia Quinn, head of procurement for Henderson Freight, one of Orion's largest longtime partners. "We're terminating," she said simply. This was the third time this week our systems failed to sync. "We were loyal for over a decade, Daniel, but this isn't sustainable." I knew the numbers. Henderson handled nearly 40% of Orion's eastbound contracts. Losing them wasn't just a financial blow, it was a death sentence. That evening, Leo called again. He sounded drained. "They laid off 3 more support staff today," he said. "And Rena hasn't shown up to the last 2 executive meetings. The board's looking for someone to blame. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. They wouldn't blame Synapse EX, that was the shiny product they sold to investors. They wouldn't blame Novamind, the consultants had already disappeared. No, they would blame whoever made the transition look easy. Whoever said legacy systems could be shut off like flipping a switch. Whoever convinced the board that 30 years of knowledge could be replaced with a few lines of code. And it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every worker in that building who got told they were replaceable. Every technician, driver, and dispatcher who gave their nights, weekends, and quiet sacrifices to build something solid, only to watch it traded away for sleek dashboards and buzzword promises. The collapse wasn't just technical, it was moral. And the worst part, it could have been avoided. The following Monday, I walked into the downtown office of Stratus Line, a regional logistics firm with a reputation for staying quietly competent while others chased trends. I had met their CTO, Elena Ruiz, at a tech conference over a decade ago, back when cloud computing was still a buzzword and AI meant predictive text. She greeted me with a firm handshake and no small talk. "We're not looking for flash," she said. "We're looking for stability, something that works." I smiled. That's exactly what I do. The contract was straightforward: 6 months to modernize their infrastructure without losing operational resilience. Full autonomy. No external consultants. And most importantly, no blind bets on tech that hadn't proven itself in the field. Within the first week, I realized what I had been missing for years: respect, not just for my technical ability, but for my experience. Elena's team listened, asked the right questions, documented everything properly. When I flagged a concern about how third-party APIs might conflict with their scheduling algorithms, they didn't dismiss it. They fixed it. Together. Every afternoon felt like rebuilding a cathedral with craftsmen who knew the value of every brick. One day in a meeting, Elena asked, "What would you build if you could start from scratch? No legacy code. No corporate politics." I paused. That night I opened my old notebooks, not the ones filled with Orion's emergency patches, but the ones I used when I still dreamed of designing clean systems from the ground up. The kind of systems that didn't need heroic effort at 2 a.m. The kind that ran so well you almost forgot they were there. By Friday, we were sketching it out, a modular logistics framework designed to evolve with human operators, not replace them. Smart, yes, but built around people, not in place of them. Elena brought in a small team of engineers who had grown disillusioned by the automation wave. They weren't jaded, they were just tired of being told that their intuition no longer mattered. With them, I wasn't a legacy asset. I was a mentor, a guide, and for the first time in years, I felt useful without having to prove it. 3 weeks in, we had a prototype running. Not flashy, not fancy, but solid, transparent, explainable. Every piece of logic traceable by a human eye. It didn't predict things with 99% accuracy. It predicted them well enough and left the final call to a human dispatcher who knew the backroads better than any algorithm. That was the point. The goal was never to fight technology. The goal was to reclaim ownership of how it's used. Orion had forgotten that. Stratus hadn't. And as I stood in their glass-walled meeting room on a rainy Wednesday, presenting the first stable deployment to a room full of nodding engineers, I realized something. This wasn't a comeback. This was a beginning. And this time, we were building it right, with people who cared. What happened at Orion wasn't just a system failure. It was a failure of imagination, the kind that comes from believing experience is outdated, and speed is always better than wisdom. Technology is a tool. It can enhance decision-making, scale operations, and even transform industries, but only when it's built on a foundation of real-world understanding. What too many executives forget is this: algorithms can process data, but they can't replace judgment earned through decades of trial, error, and quiet dedication. Replacing people like Daniel wasn't just short-sighted, it was a cautionary tale for every company chasing the next shiny solution without asking who built what they already depend on. In the end, Daniel didn't just prove his value, he redefined it, not by fighting the future, but by helping shape a better one. One where people and technology work together, not in conflict. If you've ever felt overlooked, replaced, or underestimated, this story is for you. Let us know you're still here. Comment loyalty has value. And if this story made you feel something, share it, like it, and subscribe for more true stories that remind us what really matters in the modern world. Some voices should never be silenced.